Assalamu alaikum, dear students of class 4th year. In the previous lecture, we had read the text until page number 3, first paragraph. Today, we will move on with the second paragraph of page 3. You can recall that we were discussing the aspects of the extract of Liaquat Ali Khan's speech in the United States of America as the first Prime Minister of Pakistan. He had discussed the reasons why they had demanded a separate homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent. They had given religious reasons, that they had given geographical reasons, they had given the reasons of caste system, and they had given the reasons of economic outlook for a country for themselves. So they had many things in their mind that they had demanded a separate homeland for themselves. And Liaquat Ali Khan is referring to all those reasons. And you can recall easily the reasons which we had read in his speech in the previous lecture. The next reason he is going to give is the differences of culture. He starts off with, but since the Hindus were much larger in number, the Muslims feared that under their domination, the culture of the Muslims would suffer a great setback and would perhaps be totally eclipsed. So the Muslims feared that their culture would be suppressed in front of the culture of Hindus, because Hindus were in majority and there was a vast difference between the cultures of Hindus and the culture of Muslims. So if the Muslims were to live under the rule of the Hindus, obviously their culture, the Muslims' culture, would have its serious setback. Furthermore, in a country which was on the whole backward, the Muslims economically and industrially were even more backward. And the conditions of Muslims, the industrial and economic condition of Muslims was very low in comparison to Hindus in the subcontinent. It seemed certain to them that as an unalterable and perpetual minority, their economic position would grow even worse. And they knew very well that when the two nations, that is Hindus and Muslims, were residing under the rule of Britain, under another government, they still the Muslims had lower level of rights, lower level of economic and cultural stability and industrial stability as compared to Hindus. And if Hindus were to take the rule of the whole country and Muslims were to live as minority and as a suppressed nation, obviously their economic position would grow even worse. It will grow even bad. Thus, to the Muslims in that part of the world, freedom from British rule meant practically nothing unless it meant freedom from the domination of the Hindu majority also. Therefore, it would not be of any use for Muslims to get freedom from the British rule, because after getting freedom from the British rule, they will have even more problems being Hindu majority. So this was another reason for their of the separate country. It was for these reasons that they asked for a country. So he concludes by saying that these were the reasons that the Muslims of the subcontinent asked for a country for their own selves. The demand was not so unreasonable as it was made out to be by some people at that time. He says that at that time some people were of the thought that this demand is quite unreasonable, but Liaquat Ali Khan says that this demand was not at all unreasonable, because the subcontinent was vast enough for two large countries, because the geography of the subcontinent was suitable to be divided into any two large countries. The Muslims were numerous enough to constitute a nation bigger than most nations in the world, and the second and the subcontinent was large enough, and the number of Muslims was also numerous enough to constitute a nation. So both ways, Muslims were not the number of Muslims was not too low to establish a separate nation, and the area of the subcontinent was not so small that couldn't afford a separation between two nations or two countries. On page number 4, and in the subcontinent there were large enough areas where they were in majority. And he says in the subcontinent there were large enough areas they were in majority, so it wasn't a problem that some Muslims are scattered here and some are scattered over there throughout the country. So it wasn't a big problem, because most of the Muslims were residing or living in the same areas, and those areas were also not very far away from one another. It is these areas that were separated, and today from the independent sovereign state of Pakistan, and these were the areas which were constituted as Pakistan, and now in these areas Pakistan has its own sovereign state. We believed then, and we believe now, that the demand of the Muslims in British India to have a separate state of their own was both on human and geopolitical grounds a very reasonable demand. So he again concludes the reasons, and he says that geopolitical grounds and on human grounds, both geopolitical and human grounds, the demand was reasonable. To millions of Muslims, it meant the only opportunity freedom and genuine self-government. To millions of Hindus, it gave the same opportunity for developing their own culture, untrammeled by the constant discontent of a large and unmanageable minority. Liaquat Ali Khan says that it was suitable and beneficial for both the nations. For the Muslims had the opportunity of genuine freedom by making their self-government, and Hindus had the opportunity to escape the constant discontent created by an unmanageable minority, a minority which is large in itself, but it is unmanageable, but it is obviously has its own opposed opinions, has its own opposed rights, and the like. From the point of view of world peace, and next he comes to the point of view of world peace, he also says again it was suitable because the creation of two independent and comparatively homogeneous states instead of a single uneasy and unwidely state with great strains and stresses within the body politic was